host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. My name is Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Chris Hedges. He is a journalist and author, and he's the host of the Chris Hedges Report on the Real News Network. Welcome back, Chris. Thanks so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks, Sabrina.
So I want to start off with post-midterm election results. We saw that we didn't really have a red wave, so to speak, which was expected to happen. But the Democrats did lose the House. I noticed there was a lot of focus from the Democratic Party on these Senate seats per se. And at the same time, they ended up losing the House, which means that a lot of this legislation, especially progressive legislation, is probably not going to get a chance to get through. And I wanted to hear from you about that. Why do you feel the Democrats lost the House, but not so much the Senate?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's be clear that the Republican Party is probably the worst political party in American history, filled with cranks and conspiracy theorists and Trump cult-like followers. So the fact that the Democratic Party can't swamp them should be disturbing. We have a couple of senators in the Senate who are Democrat only in name. They regularly vote against Democratic policies. Although there was some progressive legislation passed to the House, it was all killed effectively in the Senate, including we saw with the railroad strike, the bill to allow 7 paid days of sick leave was killed in the House. So I think it's just part of the political stagnation that was true before the midterms and is true after the midterms. And that stagnation is very difficult. Almost none of the promises that the Biden administration made when it was running for the presidency have come to fruition, whether that's the Build Back Better bill, paid family leave, $15 minimum wage, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that stagnation, especially with inflation eating away at American incomes, I think it's 64% or something of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and could not cover a minor emergency of a few $100s. That feeds the kind of proto-fascist movement that gave rise to Trump and that fuels the following behind figures like DeSantis and others.
Speaking of that, I did see a poll recently that Ron DeSantis has now passed Donald Trump, and I'm a little bit, concerned about that because I actually think Ron DeSantis is worse than Donald Trump. He was a JAG officer. I found out recently about his time at Guantanamo Bay, which I did not know about for a long time. I think he's actually going to be worse. So there's this perception that a lot of the Trump base has moved away from Trump. I actually don't believe that. I think he still has a strong base, but I see some of those people moving towards Ron DeSantis, who I think could be even worse. And I want to get your opinion about that. If Ron DeSantis were to run in 2024, if he got the Republican nomination and he ran in 2024 and Joe Biden again is the nominee for the Democratic Party, do you think that someone like Ron DeSantis could win because of the failures of the Democratic Party and them not supporting the working class?
Yeah, that's my biggest fear. And at that point, these forces are going to snuff out what's left of our very anemic democracy. And I agree with you. A figure like DeSantis is far more dangerous than Trump because he's competent. Trump is a moron and impulsive and disorganized, but that's not true for DeSantis or for Tom Cotton or Pompeo or others. All three of whom, by the way, come out of the military.
Right. And Ron DeSantis, to me, he seems to be a little bit more professional, and he puts on a good face. I think he's not as crass as Donald Trump was. And at the same time, I think that the Democratic Party has made a big mistake here, not supporting the working class. And it didn't just start with Joe Biden. This goes back, at least for me, for my generation, this goes back to Obama, right? Just forgetting about the workers. I think the railroad strike was a big reveal for a lot of people. A lot of people I have spoken to are very upset. I did speak to the railroad workers on this show. They are also, as you can imagine, very upset, not happy with the way that things turned out. And I want to get your opinion about this in reference to the working class and the Democratic Party. What I
Yeah,
have
well, the Democratic Party, again, while Biden was campaigning, they all promised to push through a bill to strengthen collective bargaining, and then threatened with a railroad strike. They revoked the possibility of collective bargaining for one of the very few entities, railroad workers, that retained it.
Right.
They forced railroad workers to accept a contract that over 50% had already rejected. So, yeah, the Democratic Party is long on rhetoric, but solidly behind the corporate oligarchy that has carried out the coup d'etat, in essence, that seized control of both parties and seized power. And that fundamentally is the problem. We see it with the war industry. The only opposition to this endless funding of weaponry that's going into Ukraine comes from largely cranks and conspiracy theorists in the Republican Party. The 100 members of the Progressive Caucus, including Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and they all vote for war. This staggering new Pentagon budget, $853 billion, which is more than the Pentagon asked for, actually. And they're going to supplement that with another $21 billion for Ukraine. I mean, and that's how empires die. It's unchecked, unregulated militarism that hollows the country out from the inside. So we spend these staggering sums for military adventurism around the globe, while our bridges collapse and our schools are crumbling, and we can't even get teachers to teach in the schools because the teaching conditions are so poor and the salaries are so low. Roads, infrastructures going, the rail network is, something out of Bolivia. I don't want to slam Bolivia, just to live in Bolivia, but there's no restraint now, and both parties. I mean, the Democratic Party, at least if you look at the votes in Congress, is more fervently a war party than the Republicans.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen happen too, which is also concerning, on my call-in show, I'm not sure if you're familiar with call-in, but it's a new app where people can call into the show. On my call-in show, people have called in and they've said that because of the things that they've seen happen with the Democratic Party, particularly this situation with the rail workers, that they now believe because of some of the politicians in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, voted for the 7 day sick days for leave. Because they voted for that, they now believe that the Republican Party is now the party for the working class. And I'm trying to explain to them, like, guys, no, you don't understand. This is all theater. They already knew the 7 days wasn't going to pass in the Senate. So I don't want you to have this perception that the Republican Party is now for the working class. They're both serving the same masters here. But that's the problem we're running into now, is because of the way the Democratic Party has treated the working class. Now you have some people who are from the Bernie movement, who are liberal, saying that they're going to go join the Republican Party because they believe that they're the ones that are going to support the workers. And that's very concerning.
Well, that's a political infantilism, if that's what they believe. This was the assault on the working class was bipartisan. It was Bill Clinton who transformed the Democratic Party into the Republican Party and then pushed the Republican Party so far to the right it became insane. But there's no daylight between Democrats and Republicans on all of the assaults, starting with NAFTA, destruction of welfare, the deregulation of the FCC, Glass-Steagall, all the trade deals, austerity programs. It was what they argue about are more politically tangential or cultural issues, but on the substantial issues that determine the direction of the country, there's very little difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, and of course that is evidenced in the fact that they are both slavishly beholden to the Pentagon and the war industry.
That's right. How do you feel about the way that some of the progressive politicians voted in reference to the railroad workers? Like, we've been pretty vocal about that over here, and my comrades at RBN, we made it very clear that we don't care if it wasn't going to pass in the House. As a progressive, especially those that are members of DSA, they are not supposed to be strike breakers. Now, they came back with a lot of excuses. I've had this conversation with multiple people, but to me, you're supposed to stand by your principles. And what we've seen happen over time is these progressives that have gone into Congress, and it's not just the squad. I'm going back to someone like Nancy Pelosi, who at one point in time, she considered herself to be a progressive. I remember watching the video when Nancy Pelosi actually supported single payer health care, and now she doesn't support Medicare for all. Do you feel that this strategy of putting progressives to the Democratic Party, at least on the national level, do you feel this strategy is actually working, or should we be trying something different at this point?
No, it's clear evidence from the voting record that it doesn't work. The power of a Pelosi or a Schumer is that they funnel the money from Wall Street, from corporate America, into the coffers, campaign coffers of candidates, and they can snuff you out if you don't play by the rules, if you don't do what they say. This is what happened to Dennis Kucinich, who voted against all of the military budgets, brought in articles of impeachment against George W. Bush for the Iraq War. It was the Democratic Party in Ohio that gerrymandered his district to make sure he wouldn't win after, I think he served 8 terms in the House or something. And they know that they have a choice. Either they can pay lip service to progressive values, but that's irrelevant. I remember it was Kucinich who, when Obama was running for president, gave me a printout of Obama's voting record in the Senate. I think it was only for 2 years. And Kucinich said, you got to look at this. It's every corporate giveaway, supporting capital punishment. It's what they vote. It's not what they say. I mean, and Dennis, being Dennis, said it was like when he was a kid in Cleveland going to the baseball games, the guys would go up and down the aisle going, get your scorecard, get your scorecard. He said, this is the scorecard. That's all that matters. I mean, that's why when Obama won, he won Advertising Age's Marketer of the Year. I mean, the professionals knew precisely what he had done. So it doesn't matter what they say. It matters what they do. And they're not, unfortunately, held accountable for what they do. The only way is to build movements that create pressure. Grassroots movements, unions are, of course, vital because they have the power of the strike. And those are the only way that elites respond. That's just been true throughout American history. It was all of the movements that opened up American democracy, which was very closed unless you were white, male property owner. And at the beginning, most of them were slaveholders. This was why Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States is such an important book. He showed how those movements created a more democratic system, whether it was the abolitionists, the labor movement, and we had hundreds of American workers were killed. I just interviewed on my show Adam Hochschild, who wrote American Midnight, about that destruction of the left by Woodrow Wilson, especially after World War I. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement. These are the only mechanisms we have in order to pressure power. And most of them have quite systematically been stripped from us, starting in the early 70s, and the Lewis Powell memo, of course, being the kind of blueprint for that. I think we have about 10% or something of the U.S. workforce is unionized. That's it. And even those who are unionized like the railroad workers, have been stripped of the one weapon they have to force their demands and protect their working conditions and their pay, and that's the strike. Take that away, and it's they're impotent. They can't affect power at all, and that's what we just witnessed. And it was the Democrats who did it to them.
That's right. One of the things I know they were trying to do too is that they wanted to make the railroad public and not have it privatized as well. We always tell people that, unions are a great start, but we really like push people to take that extra step if they can for worker co-op so they can have somewhat of ownership of the company. Because I've seen in the past too, like some of the union leaders will turn on the union members and not like put forth what the union members actually voted on. They'll do what's best for their spot and what's best for management. And some of those union leaders, they're making like six figures. So I've seen them kind of betray the workers too sometimes. But we try to push for people to go that extra step to start a worker co-op if they can. I understand that there's all kind of money involved in that as well, and not everybody can do that. But you have to give people something here. And I think what really woke me up about the railroad workers is like, wow, we really don't own anything. We really don't. It's like they could just come in and just break this up and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't go forward with this. And in reference to movements, I want to get your opinion about what we can do on the local level, because I saw your interview with Ralph Nader, and I agree with what he was saying that we need to be organizing with people in our community. So that's something that we heavily promote. We do mutual aid, but also when it comes to electoral politics, I've seen some of these progressive policies pass on the local level. Now, I'm in a ballot initiative state. So in Massachusetts, we've put forth like some of these policies that Bernie Sanders ran on. Like we passed $15 minimum wage years ago. We put forth the millionaire tax, which passed this year. So there's a couple of things that have gone through. Every time it doesn't win, ranked choice voting didn't pass because people didn't understand the question. But what we've seen is that even in the red states, Chris, progressive policies are passing. South Dakota passed Medicaid expansion. Nebraska passed $15 minimum wage. And I want to get your opinion about that. Do you think this could be the way to move forward in reference to electoral politics, working on the local level instead?
Yeah, I think that's where it begins. I mean, this has been part of the failing of the Green Party, is that they would mount presidential candidates, but they didn't really build a base locally. I mean, they claimed that they did, but it never really worked. We see Shama Sawan and her party, Socialist Alternative, has been quite effective in terms of organizing. I just want to go back to a point you make about the railroads and public ownership, because what's happened with the railroads is that they've been seized by corporations and consolidated into just a handful of large corporate entities. And what they've done is, of course, shrink the workforce from about 540,000 railroad workers in 1980 to just 130,000 today. So there are now only 7, I think, Class 1 freight companies, and 4 of them control 83% of rail traffic. And Wall Street keeps squeezing them for more profits. And of course, the consequences of that is that the rail workers have horrific working conditions, in that they're always on call. Of course, they don't have paid sick time. It's because they're so skeletal, the crews, that the large corporation, they're running on such a slight margin of error that if not even a significant number of those people don't come to work, they can't run the rail lines. So I just want to say that what you said about public ownership, certainly breaking up monopolies, but ultimately public ownership is key. And those institutions that, like the post office, for instance, that was publicly owned, is increasingly being crushed. Services are being cut back. Salaries of postal workers are being slashed and replaced with temp workers. There's not only a concerted effort on the part of corporate power to prevent public ownership, but they're willfully destroying those public institutions, including the public school system, because it's all about privatization. It's all about profit. And then, of course, you see the rise of these charter schools, especially in poor neighborhoods, which are just military style, rote factories, that. So, there's this steady assault. I mean, of course, we have a for-profit healthcare industry, which proved disastrous in terms of containing the pandemic. I think we were 16% of the world's deaths were less than 4% of the world's population. And of course, we are an industrialized country that should have been able to handle the pandemic, but there's no centralized medical system. It's all profit based. Again, they've been closing hospitals, especially in rural areas that they feel are not profitable or not profitable enough, because it's not about healthcare, it's about profit. I mean, we live in a country where, in essence, it's legal for corporations to bankrupt parents as they desperately try and save their sons or daughters. I mean, it's the sickness of corporate greed and corporate cruelty is very, very advanced. And I think this goes back to the frustration and the anger and the rage among the working class. And it's a legitimate rage. Unfortunately, the white working class tends to express it in very self-destructive ways. It's kind of proto-fascism or Christian fascism. But the rage is legitimate. They have every right to hate what these slick-talking politicians, from Barack Obama to Bill Clinton to George W. Bush, have done to them.
That's right. How do you think we can build solidarity with working class? And I ask this question because wealthy people have class solidarity. They'll defend each other, they'll support each other. And I feel like when it comes to the working class, we don't. We've been told to point fingers at other people as the Richard Wolff will call them the scapegoats. Like you said about the white working class, they're told it's the immigrants' problem. It's the Mexicans that are coming here. That's the reason why you can't get a good job or you don't have higher wages. How can we change the mindset and to get them to see that you're pointing your finger at the wrong enemy? It's not the immigrants, it's the elites that are in power that control everything. And that's why you're stuck in the financial situation that you're stuck in today.
By organizing. I mean, Walmart, there you go, one of the most evil corporations in America, outside of maybe Raytheon and Halliburton and the weapons manufacturers. It needs to be unionized, and that's really where it's got to begin. Now, that means dealing with people who have opinions or political views that many of us find repugnant. But it is that process of confronting power that is itself illuminating. There's a kind of educational process that goes with that. People forget that in unions, a huge component of union activity was always educational classes, so that you understood power, you understood how economics work, how political power works. That's what Emma Goldman writes about. And, they're working, I don't know, 12 hours a day in sweatshops in the Lower East Side. And then in the evening, they're in Yiddish anarchist study groups. But I think it's beginning to address the economic assault to work with organizers. I mean, the railway union is a good example. It's been years. It takes a long time to build those kinds of organizations. And that really means, in many ways, not falling for this kind of boutique activism of woke politics, which is, I think the ruling class loves it, because it's a way for the educated to dismiss often the uneducated. I mean, it's interesting. I teach in a prison. I just finished through Rutgers. It's the college degree program. I just finished my last class on Tuesday, and my students, if they have a 3.1, can then matriculate to Rutgers, and they have been busy helping to organize the service workers at Rutgers. Well, my students are mostly Black, but some of those service workers are Trump supporters and white. And that, for me, is a kind of model of where we have to go.
Well said. That's something I've tried to explain to people too is like, you can't just, if you want to have a labor movement, like, you can't say, I'm not going to have Trump supporters a part of this movement. Then you're not going to have a real labor movement. You can't exclude like millions of people. Millions of people voted for Donald Trump. I think we have to remember that. So you can't just say, I'm not going to let that part of the population be a part of a labor movement. And I think as long as we have mainstream media, and I want to get your attention or your opinion about mainstream media, as long as we have mainstream media like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC telling us that it's the left's fault, it's the right's fault, we're focused on the wrong things. We're focused on a political party divide so that we're not paying attention to the class issue. And one of the things that I've seen over time is I rarely hear them talk about class on mainstream media. A lot of times on these networks, it's all about Republican or Democrat. And even when they talk about the worker issues, sometimes they talk about it in such a negative way. It's like, well, what more do these workers want? They're saying that now with the Uber drivers that are going on strike. And so to me, it's just like they know what the real problem is. But if they were to have those conversations on mainstream media, then a lot more people would wake up. Do you feel that mainstream media is to blame for the reason why we may have some of the political opinions that we do and the political divide we have in this country?
Yeah, and who owns it? I mean, it's about a half dozen corporations own what about 90% of Americans listen to or watch. So you don't find any daylight on these kinds of issues. A war would be one, class, the class warfare that's being waged quite effectively by the oligarchs against us. You're not going to hear it. It's because News Corp and Viacom and all these corporations don't want you to hear it. So yeah, that's the media landscape has become very, very impoverished during my career as a journalist. I've watched those changes. I've watched how constricted it has become, and I think that one of the, I don't know whether he thought of it, but one of the astute campaign tactics of Trump is that he went into these deindustrialized areas and promised to bring the jobs back. I mean, of course, he was lying, but this fired up a lot of dispossessed workers. I know I was out in
Mhm.
Anderson, Indiana for my book, America, the Farewell Tour. And that used to be a big GM city where they made 25,000 unionized workers. And then after NAFTA, they literally packed up the factories and moved them to Monterrey, Mexico, where they pay Mexican workers $3 an hour, or maybe it's $3 a day. I can't remember. I think it's $3 an hour, with no benefits. And I was speaking with the old UAW leadership in Anderson, and they said their workers had supported in the primaries Bernie Sanders, but they were never going to vote for Clinton. They know who passed NAFTA. They're not stupid. And there was a huge campaign in the UAW to get people. They said, all right, go ahead and vote for Trump, but make sure you vote for the Democratic slate within the state. It didn't work, of course. So Trump, and Hillary Clinton just ignored it. In fact, insulted these people, calling them deplorables. Um, uh, but Trump spoke to their anger and gave voice to that anger, often in very crude and vulgar ways. But it played, and things are only getting worse. I mean, inflation is just destroying low-income households, and the Biden administration isn't doing much about it.
That's right. One of the things that we've talked about as well is canceling a portion of the student loan debt, which Joe Biden didn't do that the proper way. He did that through the HEROES Act instead of the Higher Education Act. Elizabeth Warren, Ayanna Pressley, and Chuck Schumer knew this last year when they drafted this and they told him how to do it through the Higher Education Act. So I honestly felt like this was just a ploy to get people to come out and vote in the midterms. And there was a high amount of young voter turnout in the midterms. And part of it had to do with canceling part of that student loan debt and then also the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Then immediately after the midterms, a judge strikes it down, which I believe personally that Joe Biden knew that that was a possibility when he did it the way that he did it. And I want to get your opinion about that. Do you feel like he was being, I guess you would say, 100% genuine when he chose to cancel a portion of student loan debt? Or do you feel like, again, this was just another play of theatrics here to
Yeah,
get people
it's
to vote?
political theater. We have to remember who Joe Biden was. Obama picked him because, although a Democrat, he voted Republican. This guy has a really dirty record, which is why he was anointed as the nominee. I mean, let's go back to him going after Anita Hill so
Yeah.
Clarence Thomas could sit on the Supreme Court. He was one of the most fervent advocates of the wars in the Middle East. He is an abject supporter of the apartheid state of Israel. He fought school busing. And with Strom Thurmond, an open segregationist and racist, sponsored the Comprehensive Crime Control Act, which eliminated parole for federal prisoners and limited the amount of time sentences that they had for good behavior. He was behind the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill. He helped draft it. He massively expanded death penalty for federal crimes from just a couple to, I think, 51, doubling the nation's prison population. He's the one who militarized the police, pushing through the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act that gutted the writ of habeas corpus. He was one of the authors of the Patriot Act, which allows the government with very little oversight to monitor all of our communications, phone, email, bank records, credit card reports, and of course, any activity on the internet. He was one of the architects of the destruction of welfare, and 70% of the original recipients on welfare were children. He's long called to cut Social Security. He fought for NAFTA. He backed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act that eliminated the defenses for undocumented people and saw them far more easily deported. He deregulated the banking industry with the abolition of Glass-Steagall. And that was a major contributor, not only in the global financial crisis, but in the collapse of nearly 500 banks in the United States in 2000, 2008. Canada didn't have banking collapse because they didn't rip down the firewall between commercial and investment banks, which is what Glass-Steagall did. He's long been a tool of the pharmaceutical industry, the for-profit insurance industry, which contributed heavily to his campaign. I mean, I can just go on and on. I mean, so, Gore Vidal said, it's the United States of amnesia. We have to, you're not going to hear it, as you said, no mainstream media publication is going to lay out who Joe Biden really is. It's just our politicians have kind of manufactured personalities that are emotionally appealing, but non-reality based. So Biden's been one of the stalwarts of this assault and this project. They used to call him Senator Credit Card because all these credit card companies are in Delaware, and of course
Delaware.
they employed his son Hunter. I mean, it's really dirty.
And there's a lot of information that's come out with these Twitter file released, starting with Matt Taibbi released information that I think a lot of us, we kind of knew this was happening, but we didn't have any actual evidence that Twitter was told by the FBI to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, along with many other things. Any type of negative criticism about Joe Biden, there was much more suppression. This was during the 2020 election there. So it makes me wonder, if more people knew about that story at that time, would as many people have voted for Joe Biden? I really wonder about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that the media did a terrible job at, I mean, of course, they were essentially working for the most part on behalf of Biden, the New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, etc. And so there was open collaboration I mean, remember, the New York Times was calling the contents on Hunter Biden's laptop disinformation, straight out of the Russian playbook, that kind of stuff. Silicon Valley made a quid pro quo with the Democratic Party. Democratic Party won't break them up, and therefore they, especially the end of the campaign, where it's dark money, so we don't know, but significant money, probably hundreds of millions of dollars. A lot of negative advertising came out of Silicon Valley on behalf of Biden, and the deal is we won't touch your monopolies.
That's right. And I want to get your take on the billions and billions of dollars that have been sent to Ukraine. So as you know, Zelensky was in DC the other day. Again, still asking for more money.
Right.
This is unbelievable. And to me, it's just, I don't understand how people can still defend it at this point. Like, it's been, I think Glenn Greenwald said it's now going to total like 100 billion. I have to double check throughout this whole year, the amount of money that's gone to Ukraine. But at the same time, the same politicians won't vote for any type of social programs or putting money into social programs that'll help the American people directly. They will tell us that they don't have enough money to give everybody universal health care in this country. But every other week, I'm hearing another announcement that they're sending more and more money to help Ukraine. And I think what's important for people to know is that it's not just weapons that they're sending them. If you look at the actual packages, some of those packages include healthcare, clean water. We have cities here that don't have clean water in the United States. I don't see them trying to do that to help people in Flint or Jackson, Mississippi. It's been mutual aid organizations that have been helping those people and not the United States government. And the question that I have is, how do you wake up the American people to this reality? Because I feel like they are heavy propagandized. I see all these people with these Ukraine flags in their bio. They think they know what's going on. They don't know the whole story. And it's just, to me, how do you wake people up to that without coming across as, I don't care about the people over there? Because it's not that we don't care. It's just that we could be using that money to help people here as well.
Well, because the propaganda is so extreme, any questioning of the Ukrainian project means you instantly become a pariah. You can't even talk about the history behind the Russian aggression. I'm not defending it, of course, but I was in Eastern Europe in 1989. I covered the revolutions in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. So we all thought NATO had been rendered obsolete, founded in 1949, designed to prevent Soviet expansion into Central and Eastern Europe. Everybody started talking about the peace dividend. We wouldn't have to continue the expenditures on the military that had been true during the Cold War. Promises were made to Gorbachev not to expand NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany. I was there for that. Gorbachev wanted to build a military and economic alliance with Europe and the United States, but the war industry wasn't having any of it, because in order to sell weapons, they need an enemy. So if Russia wasn't going to be the enemy, they'd make Russia the enemy. They expanded NATO up to Russia's borders, despite frequent protests from Moscow, legitimate protests. George Kennan, the great Sovietologist, called the expansion of NATO the greatest blunder in post-Cold War diplomacy. And Clinton promised that we wouldn't station NATO troops in Eastern or Central Europe. Now I think there's about 100,000. We orchestrated the 2014 coup to install an anti-Russian government, which precipitated a civil war, which I can't remember the figure, left 14,000 Ukrainians dead. And Russia took the bait. Now it's preemptive war. Preemptive war under post-Nuremberg laws is a criminal war of aggression. But even to begin to lay out that history is an anathema. You can't do it. You can't say it. I think that there's the war industry cloaks and especially the Democratic Party is guilty of this. They cloak this militarism in a kind of a moral facade of a virtue and goodness and democracy. And it doesn't matter whether it's the 20 years of the fiascos in the Middle East, going all the way back to Vietnam, which they used to also call the Good War. And so I covered war for 20 years. It's a messy business. Both sides lie like they breathe. I can assure you the Ukrainians are also committing atrocities, maybe not on the same scale as the Russians, but I can assure you that they exist, not that they'll be reported. There have been all sorts of reports of the execution of so-called Russian collaborators. CBS ran a report that they had to yank down about only 30% of the weapons actually getting to the Ukrainian army, because it's not audited or controlled once it enters Ukraine. The rest ending up in the black market or in the hands of warlords. So, which all fits with the kind of chaos, mayhem, and moral depravity of war, which is what my latest book, The Greatest Evil of War, is all about. So, there's no real discussion of Ukraine. You're either a cheerleader or you're locked out. Those are the only two options. And the media is the gatekeeper on that.
Right. Are you surprised that more people haven't learned that lesson, given what we were told about the Iraq war, how we found out later on that there were no weapons of mass destruction? Are you surprised that people are falling for this again, or at least not questioning the narrative, so to speak?
No, I'm not surprised. It kind of happens in every war and every conflict, because this war is different. This war is special. Although all the tropes are the same. So instead of Saddam Hussein being the new Hitler, Vladimir Putin is the new Hitler. And until we go to war with China, I guess. I mean, it's all the same. You know, the Ukrainians are on the forefront of the battle for democracy, and Ukraine, by every standard, was a very corrupt, fairly dysfunctional country before this conflict began. Zelensky, who was a stand-up comic, is now compared to Churchill. I mean, it is the height of absurdity. But since the media essentially operates in the very constricted linguistic confines of cliches, that's all people are fed.
What do you feel is the end result here? A lot of us are calling for peace. We want this to stop. Do you feel like this is going to be another one of those never-ending wars, or do you feel like there will be some type of resolution soon?
Well, ultimately, they have to talk, but there won't be much left of the Ukraine by the time they talk. And the New York Times ran an editorial which said this idea that Kyiv is going to reconquer all of Ukraine, including the eastern region, which populated by ethnic Russians, who, by the way, have been there for 2 centuries, is not realistic. They don't know where it's going to end any more than they knew where Iraq or Afghanistan was going to end. Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, these stocks have gone up by about 35% since this conflict began. Well, the rest of the market's depressed. And the same was true in Afghanistan. They kept the war going. We know from the Afghan papers, no military or political leader years before we got out thought that this was a winnable war. But it kept going because it's a business. War is a business. Made a lot of people very rich. And that's what's happening now in Ukraine. But it's dangerous, as Henry Kissinger, a man I loathe, but he pointed out correctly that you humiliating Putin and continuing this war is dangerous, because this is a nuclear power. And I have covered wars, and you don't, once you open that Pandora's box, you don't know where those evils go. You don't know how you don't control it; it controls you. Barbara Tuchman wrote about that, in the First World War, the guns of August, and all. So that's the danger, and it's a very cynical policy. It has nothing to do with Ukraine, of course. It has to do with degrading Russia, and in the best scenario of the war makers, removing Putin from power, and they'll make Ukraine pay the price. But yeah, they don't know where it's going, and any more than they knew where Afghanistan was going. uh,
Mm.
and it's indefensible. I mean, it's just indefensible in terms of its cynicism and in terms of its diversion of resources, once again into the hands of the militarists.
All right, Chris, I have two more questions for you because I want to be respectful of your time. I read that the Vietnam War was the last war that was actually televised in the sense that they showed the casualties on TV. So people saw whether it was children, adults, etc. Do you think if they had continued doing that, more Americans would be anti-war?
Yeah, I mean the so I covered the first Gulf War, and the press restrictions were severe because the people who uh, set down the rules or guidelines for the press came out of Vietnam. So that's where you got the pool reporting, which I didn't abide by. I mean, I speak Arabic and I slept out in Bedouin homes in the desert and went into Kuwait on my own. But most of the reporters abided by it. And it was a tightly controlled narrative. When you are in a pool or escorted by the military, you go where they want you to go and you see what they want to see, which, by the way, is how the Ukrainian government is running the coverage. They will take reporters into a liberated town for a few hours or up to the front line for a few hours with minors, and then they come back. But you don't have any concept of what's actually happening on the ground. And you're right, that is a legacy of Vietnam because there was this myth embraced by some in the military and the right wing that the press lost the war in Vietnam, as if that war was ever winnable, and as if the American military wasn't defeated because of their own uh, savagery, which turned the whole country against them, including carpet bombing.
Well said. The last question I have for you, come 2024. If the choices are Joe Biden and Trump or a Trump like figure, let's just go at Ron DeSantis. Should people, given everything that has happened under Biden's presidency, do you feel that people should still vote for Joe Biden again? And why or why not?
Well, I mean, I was Ralph Nader's speechwriter. I have long tried to work to build third party movements. We haven't gotten very far because the two parties conspire quite viciously against us. And the fact the Democrats are worse, they challenged all of Nader's voting lists in courts to run up his legal bills. I think they got up to about $1 million or something, locking him out of the debates. So we're going to have to take that very grim and difficult step if we are going to actually build an alternative base. At the beginning, it's going to be hard. We're not going to get a lot of support. In fact, we're going to be vilified. But it's what we should have done a long, long time ago. I mean, Ralph never thought he would win. I mean, the Progressive Party, for instance, powerful political party at the turn of the century, never won, but it got big enough that it pressured, especially Teddy Roosevelt and others, to respond. Eugene V. Debs, who I think at the height got about 6% of the vote, again frightened the Democrats. And that's what Ralph wanted, 5, 10, 15 million people to put pressure on the Democrats to begin to respond to the concerns and the rights and rectify the injustices. So I think it's only going to come from the grassroots. And it's of course, they're going to work overtime to demonize, as they have, all of us who step outside of the system and attempt to organize to push back. It's not done quickly. I mean, this is my frustration with Bernie Sanders, where he calls for a political revolution as if we're going to get a political revolution in an election cycle that ends with him telling us to vote for Hillary Clinton. Ain't going to
Yeah.
work like that. Ain't going to happen. It doesn't happen that way. And, we've got to go back and look to our radical roots, the Wobblies, all of these great radical militant, the Communist Party, let's be frank, that has been written out of American history. We have to replicate their kind of organizing and their kind of militancy if we're going to wrest back control from these corporate oligarchs that are frankly destroying the country and flirting with a third world war.
That's right. And we see there's already an article out now from The Hill saying that anyone that pushes third parties should be side-eyed. So That's news for
Well,
you guys there. But
I
Chris,
don't read
thank
that
you so
stuff. I
much.
just ignore it.
Yeah, I know. I know. I'm just giving you guys the heads up. That's already
Okay.
coming around the bank. But Chris, thank you so much for your time.
Sure, Sabrina. Yeah. Thanks for doing
Alrighty.
it.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. Great discussion there with Chris. Let me go to some of the comments here, and then we're going to get to some of the news stories. There's so much happening before the holidays. Deanna says, Brother Hedges, how's about another Occupy movement? Oh, man, we had a deep discussion. You know what? I'm going to put the link when I finish streaming tonight. I'm going to put the link to that video that those of us at RBN were on Larry Sharp show, and that discussion came up. You got to see that because we all went into that. Socialist MMA, my comrade Nick is here. Sabby is a force in independent media. Oh, that's so sweet, Nick. Oh. Mika says, Sabby, would Chris ever consider helping organize a workers' party? I can ask him that another time. I did ask him if he would consider running for president, but he's like, nah, that's not last time. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Kyle. Levy says, I'm teaching Zen's history at school and discussing class, consciousness, solidarity, strategy, and tactics. What school are you teaching at, Levi? And can we all go? Thank you for the super chat, Josh. Thank you, Sabrina, Chris, and everyone who cares. Power to the oppressed. And thank you, Eric Gray. Appreciate it as always, Chris Hedges. That's right, guys. All right. So, what other topics are we going to cover tonight? We are going to do call in after the show tonight before we head into the holidays. All right. Tonight, we are discussing. So, of course, Chris Hedges was just here. I'm also going to discuss Max Blumenthal confronts Joe Manchin about Zelensky. And we're going to talk about the Uber strike. So, that is happening. I don't blame those Uber employees. We're going to get into that in a second because there's just so much going on there. But let me go ahead and get these comments on Rockfin first, and we'll shout out patrons and we'll get into the other stories. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. What you and JB missed, retail co-op like Ace is the place for the helpful hardware man producer co-op's Ocean Spray, Lando Lakes, Organic Valley, Utility Co-op, Tennessee Valley, Authority Consumer Co-op, small grocery stores, worker co-ops, Means TV. Oh, I forgot about Means TV. That's right. Means TV is a worker co-op. And Rockfin. Why do you think I send on here so much? Financial co-ops, aka credit unions, look at the front door of every CU. They all say co-op, multi-stakeholder co-op is all. And thank you for this tip as well. Co-op is all. These different co-ops working together, forming their own supply chains independent of and outside of the corporate supply chain. We need massive government investment in boosting co-ops, just like government did for corporations right after the Civil War in a decade. Ukrainian Nazis will eventually attack the U.S. According to America, today's freedom fighters will be tomorrow's terrorists. Just ask Osama. Oh, wait, we can't. Well said there, Roger. Well said. Want to give a quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much. You keep the lights on around here. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. Like I said, you do keep the lights on, all 3 of them that are around me. There are 3 lights surrounding me that you guys just can't see. So sometimes it gets a little toasty in here, to be honest. That's why I got a little fan. All right, let's go ahead and get into our first news story tonight. Yes, you heard that right. Uber employees have decided to go on strike. At least they have in New York. And I just found out earlier this morning that they are also striking in Boston, my town. So let's go ahead and get into it. Rideshare drivers strike in Boston, citing low wages amid high inflation. Let's go on. Rideshare and delivery drivers formed a protest caravan from East Boston to the State House on Wednesday morning, calling on lawmakers to pressure companies like Uber, Lyft, and Instacart to provide them fair wages, union rights, and benefits. Rideshare drivers are listed as independent contractors. However, many of the app based workers say the pay they receive from the companies is not keeping up with the rising cost of inflation and service expenses, which has left many of them to work longer hours with little autonomy in their work. Let me just jump in here for just a second. Here's how it works. So my husband drove for Uber and Lyft for a little bit while he was working his full-time job. This is when we were trying to like save money for the wedding. And yes, you can make good money. You can go out on a Friday night. If you go into Boston, you drive around the areas where a lot of the bars are. You can make good money that night. But remember, you also have to pay Uber. The company is going to take their share. You have to pay for gas. So you're not getting as much as you think that you would, but you can do pretty well depending on the city and the traffic at that time. That being said, because they are independent contractors, a lot of these positions do not offer any type of benefits. That can include healthcare, that can include sick days. If you don't drive, you just don't get paid. Like that's kind of how it works, unfortunately. Now, some would argue and say these are not meant to be full-time jobs. But why not? Taxi drivers have a full-time job. You can be a full-time taxi driver, right? Why can't you be a full-time Uber driver? There are some people that I've met that are Uber drivers and Lyft drivers that are retired. And this is something that they do to keep money, more money coming in, especially now that we are in inflation. So we're in inflation. We have high prices. Everything's still high, by the way. I was just at the grocery store. The grocery store prices are still high, but they're not allowed to get a raise because they're independent contractors. If anyone is in the chat and you've been an independent contractor, raise your hand, give me a shout out and let me know. And what people have to understand is that when you are a contractor, you are not privy to the same benefits as people who are permanent employees. I have been a contractor. During that time, I did not have health insurance unless I was going to pay out of pocket for the health insurance. I did not have sick leave. So if I got sick and I took that day off, I just didn't get paid. Oh, I got a couple in the chat. All right. Couple of contractors. That's just how it works. The idea, though, typically when you take a contract position is that you're supposed to get paid more because you're not getting those benefits, right? Even when I was contract, I still got a raise. These guys are not getting a raise. And that is a problem, given the fact that we do have inflation in this country right now. One more piece here, and then I have a video I want to show you about Uber here. In Boston, Uber drivers earn a median of a little over $26.50 an hour. That's according to the Uber news release from 2021. Uber charges their drivers a 25% service fee for every trip they complete. So you see, this is a big part of the problem right here. That service fee. That's part of the problem. That's where some of the money goes. However, in recent years, drivers have noticed their service fees increase to 30 to 40%, and in some cases, even 50%. At this point, it's not even worth it, you guys. If they're charging you a 50% service fee, it's not even worth you to have that position. I'm just being honest with you, just keeping it real. It goes on to say Uber is able to take a higher percentage of a driver's fare for very short rides that pay the minimum fare. Now, that's according to Brett Helling, a rideshare driver who founded the company Gig Worker. But when the change in service fees does occur, there is no prior notice. So it just happens. So this is another thing. Additionally, as prices soar due to inflation, necessities such as car insurance and auto maintenance are also eating a larger percentage of rideshare drivers' take-home pay. Yeah, believe it or not, you have to pay for gas to drive a car. That's oil changes, all the other maintenance that goes along with that. I really do think when Uber started this company, I don't think it was meant to be like a full-time job. It was something people were supposed to do on the side. But some people have been able to make good money doing this full time. Either way, give the people some type of benefits. We go on to this piece here. Now, this is one of the drivers that said when he first started out, Hilali said he used to drive a Highlander for Uber trips. The hybrid car could fit 6 to 7 people and was big enough to be comfortable for his 6'5" stature. However, when gas prices started rising in Massachusetts, he was forced to switch to driving the much smaller Prius to save money. Uber is making record profits, but is underpaying us. It's exhausting, especially as we struggle to provide for our families. Last year, Uber made $17.5 billion in revenue, a 56% increase from 2020. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the problem with Uber's model, because I was looking at this today, this video, and I thought about it and I said, maybe Uber, like Twitter, grew too fast. Maybe Uber took on more drivers than they could actually afford. I've seen these kind of businesses before. We're going to get into this video clip and I'm going to give you other examples where I've seen this not work out well, just not at all. Let's go ahead and get into this clip. Here's some of the things that went wrong with Uber. Now, the name of this video is called Uber Won't Exist in 5 Years. Here's why.
A taxi company. However, while this looks great on the outside, this business model is much more sinister than it first seems. For starters, Uber prefers for their drivers to be viewed as independent contractors rather than actual employees, meaning that technically, Uber doesn't have to pay any of their drivers a minimum wage, nor do they have to pay sick pay or any other kind of benefits whatsoever. Uber also
You see that? They don't even have to give them a minimum wage.
Doesn't own any of the vehicles and won't cover maintenance, fuel, or anything else. All of these burdens rest on the shoulders of their drivers. And from a purely economical standpoint, this business model is revolutionary. It's great for Uber because they don't have to pay their workers nearly as much as the traditional taxi services. However, Uber's problem was that lots of this was actually illegal. In fact, from the get-go, Uber's practices were illegal in San Francisco where they originated from, something that would quickly come back to bite Uber. However, back when Uber was founded, regulators hadn't caught on to their tactics yet, and so Uber had a very small period to monopolize the taxi industry and become too big to stop. And so in order to take over the taxi industry, the company would make many sacrifices by taking on heavy financial losses early on, all in the name of continuing their expansion. The only thing keeping Uber afloat was the large investments they were receiving, as Silicon Valley was betting that Uber was going to monopolize the modern transportation service industry. And if Uber was able to secure a monopoly, they would eventually become extremely profitable. If they were the only option on the market, Uber could then jack up the prices without worrying about being undercut by the competition. In fact, a monopoly was necessary for Uber due to the extremely thin profit margins that their business model gave them. However, the company's lack of profitability didn't faze Uber or their investors. They were putting all their chips on the rapid growth. And for a while, this paid off. In just a few short years, Uber services had been rolled out across the world. This was a genius strategy in a lot of ways, and this was all coming from one man known as Travis Kalanick, one of the key founders who created Uber. And it was also because of Kalanick that Uber became such a controversial company. But back in the early years of Uber, and the negative press towards the company wasn't anywhere near what it is today. In fact, at the time, Kalanick was a business prodigy. Under his leadership, Uber successfully expanded from a small San Francisco startup to a global sensation. And the strategy behind this was fairly simple.
Do you think that Uber maybe grew too fast? And this is the question that I ask here. It started out as a startup in San Francisco, but here's the thing. Startups don't always remain startups. Eventually they grow, they get bigger. Maybe Uber should have just, I don't know, maybe focused on the West Coast first, then maybe the East Coast, kind of fill in the US before it decided to go so global. I just feel like this grew very quickly. And you have so many drivers driving for this company, people that want extra money, some of them college students that are Uber drivers say, let me get that extra money, you know? So I don't think they were prepared to deal with all that. Or maybe they knew this would happen, that they just didn't really care. Maybe they just wanted to make a lot of money and just cash out quick. But this has become an issue. And it's not just Uber that I've seen had this problem. There was a company called Lululemon, or not Lululemon. Oh, shoot balls. I forgot the name of them. They were horrible. They had these leggings. Someone in the chat knows what I'm talking about. There was a company that had these one size fit all leggings, and they blew up. And the way that this model worked was that you were supposed to be a seller for them, and then you were supposed to get your friends to also be sellers for that company as well. And so more and more people became. Here's the problem. That company, yes, it's an MLM. That company, LuLaRoe. Thank you. LuLaRoe. That was the name of it. That company, again, they grew too big too fast. So what happened was now you had all these people saying, I'm a seller for LuLaRoe. I'm a seller for LuLaRoe. I'm a seller for LuLaRoe. I couldn't go on Facebook at one point in time without seeing a friend of mine that I knew that was now advertising that they were a seller for LuLaRoe. So what happens is they started making less money because they had too many people that were trying to be sellers and not enough people that were trying to be buyers. Let's go back in. God, I still remember that. Those one size fit all.
Discussed, Uber's business model
leggings.
was genius. Genius in the sense that they didn't have to pay their workers properly. And at the same time, Uber would offer insanely cheap deals to entice people to use their services. It wasn't uncommon for your first Uber trip to be free, or for the company to give you referral bonuses if you managed to get your friends to try out the app. These marketing methods exploded Uber's user base, with all of this only being possible due to the giant influx of angel investors flowing into the company. Without the investors, Uber would be nothing. And as Uber started catching on, the app would only become more and more popular, becoming a central part of millions of lives, allowing Uber to have substantial bargaining power later down the line. It seemed like everything was perfect for Uber. They had established themselves so tightly in modern society that it became so much harder for a city to ban or regulate Uber. This aggressive and borderline illegal strategy led to unprecedented growth, but it wouldn't take long for the consequences to catch up with Uber, because Uber's aggressive expansion had given Uber a lot of enemies.
And one of those enemies was the taxi cabs. So the cab companies did not like Uber. And it's not just the New York City cabs. The Boston cab companies didn't like Uber coming here either, or Lyft. In fact, they protested against them. Uber trug on. Uber continued. They didn't like them because they said, you are cutting into our profit. We are the taxi drivers. We're certified to do this. We know these streets like nobody's business. And now here you come in as a rideshare company and you're taking business away from us. Now, I would argue a lot of these cabs didn't stop for people in Boston anyway. But if you were to look at New York City, one of the problems you have if you're trying to be a taxi driver, if you have to purchase that medallion, right? You have to have this as a New York City driver. The problem that you run into is those medallions are thousands and thousands of dollars. It's expensive to get a medallion. And so if you have it in your taxi, it's kind of like I don't want to say like a status. Well, it is kind of like a status symbol because people are like, yeah, you got your medallion. You did your thing. So the cab drivers, the taxi companies in New York City were not happy with Uber. You had cab drivers here that were like, look, I paid thousands of dollars. I saved up a lot of money to get that medallion so I can drive a cab in this city. And here comes Uber cutting in on the competition and taking my money. So, yeah, there was some competition and people were not happy about that.
The first of these was San Francisco's local government. After the government started noticing how Uber was skirting regulations, they sent the company a cease and desist letter with substantial penalties if they did not comply. The notice threatened $5,000 fines for every trip and a possible 3-month jail sentence for every day the company continued operating. Now, for most people, this would have completely destroyed the company, but not Uber. Instead of abiding by the government's demands, Uber just continued operating. As Uber had already entrenched themselves so deeply into San Francisco, they would were now coming to control the entire transportation market. Knowing how much power they now had, Uber released a press statement that snubbed the orders, stating, "Uber is a first-to-market, cutting-edge transportation technology, and it must be recognized that the regulations from both city and state regulatory bodies have not been written with these innovations in mind. As such, we are happy to help educate the regulatory bodies on this new generation of technology." This early statement from Uber was symbolic. It summarized their entire business model. Uber completely rejected the law and had an almost pompous attitude in saying that we are happy to, quote, educate the San Francisco government. However, this incident would only be the first of Uber's many brushes with the law, and this was all trickling down from Kalanick's leadership. Before he founded Uber, Kalanick previously started a company called Scour, but he had to shut it down after he was fined billions for copyright infringement. Kalanick never paid the full amount, of course, but this showed that he wasn't afraid of breaking the rules, and breaking the rules was exactly what Uber was doing. After establishing themselves in 2011 across the US, the taxi industries were certainly not happy with this. How could they compete with Silicon Valley funded, below minimum wage drivers who were completely outcompeting the taxi industry? The entire
Not to mention the Uber rides were cheaper than a taxi, because the Uber drivers, like, I could already see the price. I know how much this ride is going to cost me before I get into your car. Whereas with the taxi cabs, you don't know. You get in there, look, the meter starts running. I'm charged just for shutting the door. We haven't even moved yet. And I'm already charged because they shut the door. And that meter starts running and it just keeps going and going. And God forbid you hit traffic, right? It was always cheaper for me to take a Uber or a Lyft than to take a cab around here. It's just the reality of it. Not to mention, someone mentioned this in the chat, another problem you run into, depending on which city or neighborhood you live in, some of the taxi cabs don't come into certain neighborhoods. Some of the taxi cabs won't come to certain parts of Dorchester in Boston. They won't come to certain parts of Roxbury. They won't come to certain parts of Mattapan. So you have no choice but to use the Uber or the Lyft. I'm not going to play the entire video because I do have other things to get to too. And I know we got a call in tonight as well. Oh, wait, let me finish this part. Sorry.
The US taxi industry realized that if they couldn't put a stop to Uber, all of them would be out of business. Because of the pressure from these taxi organizations and other industry leaders, new legal measures were enacted across 15 major US cities, which included rules that seemed to be targeted directly towards Uber. For example, the government made it illegal to use a GPS as a meter for calculating drivers' fares. Additionally, cab drivers using their phone while driving was now forbidden, even if they were only using it for the Uber app. However, this didn't faze Uber. They'd already bypassed the San Francisco government. The Uber leadership realized they had so much power over the transportation industry that nothing could hold them back.
You see this? They were able to bypass the government, you guys.
Even the government. But one thing the company couldn't ignore was a class action lawsuit from over 350,000 former and current Uber drivers. The 2013 lawsuit suggested that Uber owed the drivers a minimum wage as well as sick pay while working for the company. This case would then drag out for years. Uber would use the best lawyers possible and eventually settled out of court with only a small portion of the claimants for around $20 million. These issues slowly became incredibly common for Uber, and the company was now starting to hemorrhage a lot of money. However, for now, this didn't matter. All that mattered was that Uber would expand across the world and monopolize the taxi industry. If they could do this, they would be $1 billion company. Of course.
And there you go. We'll have to, we could talk about this all night, but we do have other stories to get to. The name of that video, if you want to see the rest of it, is called Uber Won't Exist in 5 Years. And here is why. Eric, if you could put the link to that video in the chat for people so they can see that. That video has over 1 million views. So definitely check that out. But yeah, this is what happened. So those drivers, at least the ones in Boston and New York City, are on strike now. They just want a raise. They're just asking for a raise to handle the inflation. And Uber doesn't want to give them one. We are controlled by oligarchs, you guys. Now, to that point, what were we talking about earlier? We were talking about unions. We were talking about worker co-ops. If those workers would have had Uber as a worker co-op, they wouldn't be in this situation. They would own part of the company. Now, there is another rideshare app in New York City called Co-op Ride. That is a co-op. So if you live in New York City, download that app, Co-op Ride, and support them instead of Uber and Lyft. Again, they're a co-op. That's my recommendation. But we'll see what happens. We will see. We will see. I'm going to go to some of the comments here, and then we are going to get on to the next story. So let's see. Thank you for the super chat, Steve. Hi, Sabby. Just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. Thank you so much, Steve. Merry Christmas to you too. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Put that Occupy energy to a CBI Citizen Ballot Initiative movement. That's a good idea too, Roger. Colin says Means TV is a worker co-op, so why would they have Mike Figueredo as part of their network? He doesn't say anything about worker co-ops. I don't know, but it is a worker co-op. I've met with them, so I do know that for sure. Levi says, at Eric Gray, your cousin Eric from BJG's call-in, right? I'm teaching in Fremont, California at a small progressive Islamic school. So that's where Levi is located. Thank you for the super chat, Steven. Best holiday wishes to all. You too, Steven. You too. Jemin says, Sabby, do you have any thoughts on gig economy jobs in general? I think it would be interesting to see a platform that combines gig work in a worker co-op structure. That would be great if they were combined. The thing about the gig jobs, again, like, you just have to be careful because you're not a permanent employee. So does this gig job come with any type of benefits? If it doesn't, a lot of times they don't. If it doesn't, you're going to have money saved up so that you can pay for some type of health insurance, right? If you can get health insurance through your state. In Massachusetts, we have Mass Health. So you can buy that if you qualify. Again, it's means tested. So it depends on what your income is, but you will have to have money set aside for certain things. Like if they don't give you sick leave, you're going to have money set aside for that. If you happen to take a day off and you're not going to get paid for it. Same thing with vacation. If you don't get paid vacation with those gig jobs, you're going to have to set money aside for that too. Delthea says, Sabby, Uber's intention was and is to get as much money from the drivers as possible. Part-time and full-time doesn't really matter. Stealing value is. Betsy, remember there was supposed to be a ballot measure here in Massachusetts, RE rideshare drivers, but it was thrown out. I don't remember that one. I remember they have been on strike here before. I thought that was about like 2 years ago. That might have been like 2 years ago they were on strike. Jamie says gig work sucks because you have no security. Yeah. You would definitely have to have some money saved aside just to be safe. I'll take that comment on Rockfin and we will scoot on over to the next story. Thank you for the the tip on Rockfin JVB. Great work again, Sabby. And thank you for the tip, Roger. Sabby, I was going to explain all this to you here on Rockfin, but it is just too much goddamn typing. I will just call you on call-in because I have to give a complete explanation on how ride hailing operates in New York City, New York State, and the rest of the country. This requires a lot of words, and you know I am with words. Oh, how I am with words. Yeah, I know. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we are moving on to our next story here. I split this in half. Last night I did, or the night before, excuse me, I did half of Arizona's ballot initiatives. I'm going to do the other 3 tonight. There's 3 left. So here we go. So back to Arizona ballot initiatives. Arizona Proposition 309, voter identification requirements for mail-in ballots and in-person voting measure. And here, a yes vote supported making multiple changes to Arizona's voter identification and mail-in ballot policies, including requiring dates of birth and voter identification numbers for mail-in ballots and eliminating the existing 2-document alternative to photo ID for in-person voting. So this measure here failed. It says no votes, 50.38%. So that measure was defeated. The other measure that they had Was Arizona Proposition 310 sales tax for fire district funding measure? A yes vote supported creating a 0.1% sales tax for 20 years to provide funding for a state's fire district. This one also failed. No votes, 51.80%. So let's go down here. We have another one. This one passed. Arizona Proposition 209, healthcare debt interest rate limit and debt collection exemptions initiative. If you have any type of medical debt, this one is for you. This bud is for you. All right. A yes vote supported setting a limit on interest rates for debt accrued from receiving healthcare services equal to either the weekly average 1-year constant maturity treasury yield of 3% and increasing the amount of value for certain property and earnings exempt from attachment, execution, forced sale, and any other debt collection processes. Not only did this passed with flying colors. 72.01% voted in favor of that. And I believe I have one more, or was that the last one? Yep, one more. This one also passed. Arizona Proposition 211, Campaign Finances Sources Disclosure Initiative. A yes vote supported requiring that persons or entities that make up an independent expenditure of $50,000 or more on a statewide campaign or $25,000 or more on a local campaign must disclose the names of the money's original sources, defined as the person or businesses that earned the money being spent. That's a good one. That passed 72.34%. So they have to disclose those names, the original source. That one's pretty huge, actually. I like that. Okay. We're going into this Max Blumenthal story, which also involves Joe Manchin. So for those of you who are not aware, yes, Zelensky was at the White House the other day. He was greeted. Let's go ahead and show you the greeting, and then we're going to talk about what Max Blumenthal has to do with all of this, how he's involved. Now, this is from Hassan. He said Zelensky got a standing ovation in the U.S. Congress for being an outstanding customer of Raytheon. Oh, dear. Watch it, guys. Watch the theatrics.
Madam Speaker, the President of Ukraine.
Watch this part. Pause. Isn't that Barbara Lee? That's Barbara Lee right there. Wasn't Barbara Lee and Bernie Sanders the only ones that voted against the Iraq war? Even Barbara Lee. Look, she has on the colors too. The blue jacket and the yellow shirt. You can see part of the yellow right here. You guys see the propaganda? Let me go on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, she did, Betsy. See how people change?
Get on, Sabby. Героям слава!
I feel like this guy has been on like a celebrity tour, to be honest with you.
Thank you so much.
Members, members of Congress,
I think it's too much.
I think it is. Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky, President of the Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So that happened. Let's carry on. See how they can stand up and cheer for him like that? You see how they can do that? Let me see here. So you may be wondering, where does Max Blumenthal fit in all of this? Because Max Blumenthal was there, at least outside of the building, and he was able to get a couple of people on camera about the funding, about the spending, the amount of money that's going out the door. That me and Chris Hedges was just talking about this, the billions and billions of dollars that's just going out the door over and over and over again. Well, we have people in this country that don't have health care, that don't have clean water, people that are suffering, people that are living in poverty, which has not been fixed. But when it comes to the military industrial complex, this does not seem to be an issue. They always have money for that. Always have money for that. Now, I want to go ahead and show you part of his speech, because there was something that he said here that I found to be a little bit revealing. Listen to this. I only have part of it. And this is clipped from C-SPAN. So he's talking about a symbol of victory in this war. Listen to this, guys. Listen to the propaganda.
I know that everything depends on us, on Ukrainian armed forces, yet so much depends on the world. So much in the world depends on you. When I was in Bakhmut yesterday, our heroes gave me the flag, the battle flag, the flag of those who defend Ukraine, Europe, and the world at the cost of their lives. They asked me to bring this flag to you, to the US Congress, to members of the House of Representatives and senators whose decisions can save millions of people. So let these decisions be taken. Let this flag stay with you, ladies and gentlemen. This flag is a symbol of our victory in this war. We stand, we fight, and we will win because we are united. Ukraine, America, and the entire free world. Just one thing, if I can, the last thing, thank you so much. May God protect our brave troops and citizens. May God forever bless the United States of America. Merry Christmas and happy, victorious New Year. Slava Ukraini!
You know, of course, he had to bring God into it, right? So now they're giving him the American flag here. I was trying to get to the part where, oh, and then he exits there. Maybe I missed that part. I'll say it here. Okay. Presents Congress with a battle flag from the front line of Bakhmut, calling it a symbol of our victory in this war. So here's the problem. He's asking for more money. Even when he was here, he's asking for more money. If you're talking about your victory, why do you need more money? Somebody explain this to me. I don't know. I don't feel like it's rocket science, but let's think about this for a second. If you are asking Joe Biden for more money, you said we need more aid, we need more weapons. How is that a victory if you need more? If you're winning, you don't need more. I don't know, you guys. I don't know. I wish more people could see this. I wish more people could see it. Now, one person does see it, and that's Max Blumenthal. So he was able to approach Joe Manchin about the amount of spending that's happening in reference to this war. Listen to what Joe Manchin has to say. And then we're going to do a little adventure here, a little case study adventure here with Joe Manchin in just a second. But listen to this, because I want to show you something. We're going to call him out for the fraud that he is too. Here we go.
Yeah,
That's great. Senator, do you know how many billions we've sent to Ukraine?
We're going to send a lot more.
Yeah, you want to send more?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all in. I'm all in.
You hear that? We're going to send, you guys heard that, right? Listen.
Yeah, Senator, do you know how many billions we've sent to Ukraine?
We're going to send a lot more.
Yeah, you want to send more?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all in.
So there you have it. We're going to send a lot more. He said he's all in. Let's go on. Let's go on. You can tell he's getting uncomfortable here. Now it's let's pretend like I have a phone call.
Yeah, you want to send more?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all in. I'm all in.
You're all in?
Yeah.
Do you,
How you doing? Okay, what you got?
do you have
guys?
any problem with
me what
Zelensky
you got.
banning every opposition party?
What's that? Bring the bag.
Senator, how do we know where the
Meet me.
weapons are going?
Meet me at the. Just meet me at the. In the well there. You know, in the bottom where you come in.
Senator, how do we know where the weapons are going? They've been showing up in Africa and Lake Chad, according to the Nigerian president. Do you support?
That's true, by the way. Some of them have been showing up in Africa as well. Isn't this crazy, you guys?
Chad, according to the Nigerian president. Do you support any measure to track the weapons?
Terry Gentry, meet me there, okay?
Why isn't the money going here where there are homeless encampments surrounding the U.S. Capitol, Senator Manchin?
yeah.
That's
Yes,
great.
Senator, do you know how much?
All good questions. Why isn't the money going here when there are homeless encampments? And Max was fortunate enough here to actually capture one. So this is exactly what he's talking about. The scene 2 blocks from the U.S. Capitol as Zelensky appealed for more than $45 billion in additional military aid to continue a proxy war through 2023. Here's a homeless encampment 2 blocks away. 2 blocks away. Guys, this is the reality of what's happening here in America. I know some of you are abroad. This is the reality of what is happening here in this country, where you literally have 2 blocks down the street, so much concentrated wealth and power, right? You have Congress, you have the White House, concentrated wealth and power. And 2 blocks in this direction, you have homeless encampments. Make it make sense. And the reality is, it's not just DC, it's Los Angeles. You have all these millionaires living in Los Angeles. You have all these homeless people. Make it make sense. Same thing with San Francisco. Same thing with Boston. All the homeless people, all the money that comes into TD Garden, all the money that comes into Fenway Park, and you have all these homeless people. Make it make sense. How you got poverty right down the street next to concentrated wealth? So this is something that Max pointed out, and he's 100% correct here. It doesn't make sense. Joe Manchin is one of the most wealthy senators in this country. You guys realize this, right? He's one of the wealthiest senators, and he lives in one of the poorest states. Make it make sense how you have so much poverty in West Virginia, but your senator is one of the wealthiest people in Congress. Doesn't make sense. Now, I wanted to show you that for a reason, because I have something to say about Joe Manchin. You heard on that video, he said that they were going to send more. He's all in. All of a sudden, Joe Manchin has no problem spending money when it comes to the military-industrial complex. Joe Manchin only got problem spending money when it's money for the American people. Because in case you may have forgotten, I did not. I covered this story. Joe Manchin really did not want Build Back Better. Too much spending, he said. Too much money, he said. In case you forgot, let's all remember.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you, Brett.
Senator, you're at the center of this negotiation with the president over his social spending and tax bill, the Build Back Better bill that is not coming up in the Senate before the new year, in part largely because of your reservations. Without you, the leadership doesn't have the votes it needs. So today, right now, what's the state of play?
Well, Brett, this is a mammoth piece of legislation, and I had my reservations from the beginning when I heard about it 5.5 months ago, and I've been working diligently every day and every minute of every day. I've been working on this, meeting with, whether it be the President Biden, whether it be Majority Leader Schumer and his staff, whether it would be with Nancy Pelosi, all of my colleagues, from all different spectrums of the political spectrum, if you will, from the right to the left. I've done everything humanly possible. And my concerns I had, and I still have these concerns, and where I'm at right now, the inflation that I was concerned about, it's not transitory, it's real, it's harming every West Virginian. It's making it almost difficult for them to continue to go to their jobs, the cost of gasoline, the cost of groceries, the cost of utility bills, all of these things are hitting in every aspect of their life.
So he's talking about the inflation and the cost of the bills, but you want to vote against the legislation that will put more money in the people's pocket. Make it make sense. You want to oppose all of it. Anything that's going to help the people financially, you voted against it. Let's go on.
And you start looking at, then you have the debt that we're carrying at $29 trillion. You have also the geopolitical unrest that we have. You have the COVID variant. And that is wreaking havoc again. People are concerned. I've been with my family. I know everyone's concerned. So when you have these things coming at you the way they are right now, I've always said this, Brett, if I can't go home and explain it to the people of West Virginia, I can't vote for it. And I cannot vote to continue with this piece of legislation. I just can't.
You are from one of the poorest states in the country, and you can't go back and explain this to people in West Virginia after you just said that your voters are struggling with prices, inflation in this country, but you can't put money in their pockets. You can't help them financially any way, shape, or form. You're going to vote against that legislation. Make it make sense, people. And for the host who is interviewing him, shame on him. Shame on him. How you not push back? He just gave you a bunch of baloney, man. He didn't make any sense. You know he didn't. This is the problem with the corporate media. You're from one of the poorest states in the country, and you sell out the poor people. How do you guys, if you're watching and you live in West Virginia, how do you guys vote for him? Why you keep voting for him? Why? You guys rather vote for him than Paula Jean Swearigan, who ran against him? Especially if you coming from poverty. You rather vote for the rich man instead of the working class woman? How y'all keep voting for this fool? Somebody tell me. I miss a memo? Ask Joe Manchin. Next time you see him, he has a town hall or something in West Virginia. If you go to the town halls, next time you see Joe Manchin at the town hall, ask him, since he was so concerned about the spending when it came to Build Back Better, why isn't he concerned about the spending when it comes to Ukraine? And they've sent them billions and billions and billions of bills of dollars. And he just told Max Blumenthal that he's going to send more. Ask him. Ask him. Next time you see him at a town hall, call his bluff. This is what you have to do. You live in West Virginia. If your community is poor and you are struggling, you ask Joe Manchin, why is it that he is so damn wealthy and the rest of the damn state is poor? Ask him. We'll go back in.
Tried everything humanly possible. I can't get there.
You're done. This is a no.
This is a no on this legislation. I have tried everything I know to do. And the president has worked diligently. He's been wonderful to work with. He knows I've had concerns and the problems I've had. And you know, the thing that we should all be is directing our attention towards the variant, the COVID that we have coming back at us in so many different aspects and different ways. It's affecting our lives again. We have inflation that basically could really harm a lot of Americans, and especially those who are most needy and having a hard time struggling right now. So I think that's where our attention needs to be directed towards immediately.
You know,
and this has been going on for 5.5 months.
You're getting all the focus, Senator, but are there
Yeah,
other Democratic
It's not right.
senators who are concerned about this bill like you are? Have you talked to them?
I'm not going to speak for any of myself. I respect. They know they know the difficulties that I've been having with this. I've been very concerned about this. You know, when I first got to the Senate, back in 2011, I was having a meeting on armed services, and at that time, Admiral Mike Mullen was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I'll never forget. In this hearing, he was asked the question, "What's the greatest threat the United States of America faces?" And I'm thinking I'm going to hear something in basically with military threats we might have around the world. Without blinking an eye, he said the debt of our nation is the greatest threat. Now, the debt was $14 trillion then, Brett. It's $29 trillion now.
The debt of the nation is the greatest threat. But he has no problem expanding that debt or increasing that debt when it comes to the military industrial complex, guys. He has no problem going along with it then. It's only when you want him to give money and benefits to the American people. This guy you guys see the fraud. I don't know how this man continues to win. I really don't. But I will say this. The fact that Joe Manchin has not been removed from any committee assignments, that right there lets you know that the Democratic Party isn't as mad as him as you think. Even though some of them have come forward and they've said, oh my gosh, Joe Manchin has turned his back on the Democratic Party. He sold out the American people. Bernie Sanders will complain. Elizabeth Warren will complain. They'll complain about him voting the way that he votes. But I ain't see anybody remove Joe Manchin from any committee assignments. I said the same thing about Kyrsten Sinema. Ain't nobody take her off any committee assignments either. You know why? Because they really don't see them that much as a problem. It's a circus. It's a circus. Now we want to talk about the spending. You want to talk about how much money has been going to the military industrial complex. Here's a clip here from Case Study QB. Now, Case says they're discussing Congress' $1.66 trillion spending bill, including $40 billion more to Ukraine to the end of September 2023. Listen to this.
So meanwhile, Jake, overnight, congressional negotiators unveiled a $1.7 trillion deal to fund the government, avert a shutdown. I guess this is CR part. We're in the second CR, right? But or the first one, right? But what do we know about what's in this huge proposal and how likely is it to pass?
So it's gonna pass. It's $1.66 trillion, Jose. It funds the government through the end of September of 2023. So.
And it did pass. FYI update today. It did pass.
This pushes off any government funding threat, at least until kind of the end of the summer, early September of next year, given how Congress always deals with these things at the last minute. What are the top line pieces of information? Number one, a big increase in defense spending. This is something that Republicans had sought for a long time, more than
a big increase in defense spending. There you go. That's where most of that money is going. I'm going to ask you guys this question again. Are we at war? Is somebody coming after us? Is there something I missed? Is anyone attacking us right now? That's how they avoid giving money to us.
$40 billion in aid to Ukraine, something that the new incoming House Republican majority is a little bit skeptical of, and but there are some big increases on the domestic spending side, but obviously the defense number is the big story here. Also, a ban on government employees having TikTok on their government phone. This is something that Nancy Pelosi had pushed for after Josh Hawley got this bill through the Senate. This is just one of the many provisions in this bill, but what's stunning to me, Jose, is this came out this morning in the wee hours of the morning, 4,000 pages. It needs to pass by Friday. It's Tuesday. I mean, this is no way to run a railroad, I guess is the old saying. Yet it's how the largest and most important country on planet Earth funds itself every year.
And Jake, odds are that all the legislators are going to read every single one of the words on that 4,000
I got a bridge to sell you if you believe that.
Hey, Jake, thanks, man. It's great seeing you.
We live in a cartoon. We literally do. That bill just came out this week, over 4,000 pages. Do you expect me to believe they read 4,000 pages? They just vote on something they didn't read through? And it's 4,000 pages on purpose, by the way, so that they won't read through all of it. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. I don't see how people can watch this and not feel some type of way. I really don't. Now, there was one more video that Max Blumenthal had as well. And I want to play this one as well. So I told you he was able to catch up with a couple of people and start asking them questions. And of course, they're going to call him a propagandist and all of this jazz. So he goes on to say that he caught up with the Ukrainian diaspora delegation on their way into the capital to cheer for Zelensky. Listen to what Max Blumenthal says here. Listen to their responses. It's pretty interesting.
Is $45 billion not enough?
Nope.
Not enough? How much more should we give to Ukraine instead of our own people? Do you support the Azov battalion?
There is no more of an Azov battalion.
There's no more
All
Azov?
the battalions were trained and recruited back into a formal professional army over the last 8 years.
So the neo-Nazis were brought into the army?
No, there are no neo-Nazis in the army.
Do you support Stepan?
What? Did you guys just hear that? Now I got to be careful what I say on here because they'll come after me too. But look, I got to be careful what I say on here because of censorship. Did you hear what she just said? We all know that not to be true. We've seen the pictures. We've seen the videos. To just blatantly lie. Listen to this.
More of an Azov battalion.
There's no more
All
Azov?
the battalions were trained and recruited back into a formal professional army over the last 8 years.
So the neo-Nazis were brought into the army.
No, there are no neo-Nazis in
There's
the
none.
army.
Do you support Stepan Bandera?
Stepan Bandera died a long time ago.
War against innocent people.
I oppose the assault on Donetsk. Do you? The shelling of the people of Donetsk. Do you oppose that?
You know,
No.
are you kidding?
Why are civilians being killed in Donetsk and Lugansk? Do you oppose that? Should the U.S. send $1 trillion of our taxpayer money to Ukraine? $1 trillion?
This is the least expensive
What about 2
method of
trillion?
ensuring democracy globally.
$1 trillion. Is there any limit?
There's no, it's not close to $1 trillion.
If Ukraine is a democracy, why did Zelensky ban all opposition media and 13 political parties? No, I'm not. I'm not paid by Moscow. Are you paid?
See, this is what they do. See how they're trying to smear him now? This is what they do when they don't want to answer your questions, or you're starting to mention things that they feel you should not know, or they don't want the rest of the American public to know.
Political parties. No, I'm not. I'm not paid by Moscow. Are you paid by the Ukrainian government that's banned all opposition media?
No, I'm American.
You don't believe there is a Ukrainian government kill list maintained by the Interior Ministry?
No.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
Just like the non-existent neo-Nazis.
So her response was that she's American. Well, so was Max Blumenthal, but she still wanted to say that he was a Russian propagandist. You guys see the Jesus? You see how it works?
Lies.
Lies.
Write email
Lies.
to the Office of the Youth.
You're filled with lies.
Write them email. They really answer all the time. Write them email.
So no answer about if Ukraine is a democracy, why did Zelensky ban 13 opposition parties?
Martial law. Read the definition of martial law.
Sounds undemocratic. Why did he ban the Russian wing of the Orthodox Church?
The Russian Orthodox Church was serving as a treasonous organization and was found with materials that were illegal and financing the enemy.
So banning clergy, banning media, banning opposition. This is fighting for democracy.
You are serving Putin.
But you acknowledged it was all true.
See, she just said that he's serving Putin. You see what I'm saying?
I'm serving Putin by stating facts.
You're not stating facts.
You just acknowledged that it was martial law and it was facts.
No, all I said is it's martial law. I didn't acknowledge it's a fact.
So he didn't ban the Russian wing of the Orthodox Church.
No, he hasn't. He submitted legislation for certain purposes, and it hasn't passed.
I have a great deal of respect for Max Blumenthal because I don't know how he has the patience to deal with that. I really don't. Aye. All right. We are going to do call in tonight. Let's get ready for it. Eric, I think I'm going to take just a quick break before we go into call in. I think we need to read the chats. Yeah, there's some chats, super chats that haven't been read there. And then if there's new ones on Rockfin.
All right. This is where Sabby gets a little break. And before we go into the call-in, let's see. Let me do a paste. There's our call-in link in the chat. So you can do call-in by clicking on the link. Oh, JB Font says, good night, everyone. JB. Hey, JB, why you never calling to call in? I guess it's past his bedtime. So you can click on the link for call-in, or you can bring it up on your cell phone and join us and tell you what you think. You can you can talk about the Chris Hedges interview. You can talk about Zelensky addressing Congress. You can talk about Max Blumenthal. There's lots of good stuff to talk about. And speaking of things to talk about, let's look what people had in the chat. From our new friend Levi. He says, we're so propagandized here, it's crazy. Really recommend, Sabby, that RBN get in touch with Loki and Matt Kennard in the UK. Excuse me. They do really great work on UK and US propaganda and media. Thanks for that. Teddy said, if I voted for anyone in that chamber, I would be ashamed of myself. Yeah, I mean, that's what kind of happens when you wake up to what's really going on. It's always worse than you think or can imagine. Thanks for this super chat from Nam. Merry Xmas. Why not Happy Hanukkah? Isn't he Jewish or what? Talking about what Zelensky was saying. Chris Lynn, it doesn't make sense, but West Virginia voters keep electing him back to office. Thanks for this super chat. Delthea, who I hope we'll hear from a little later and call in. Homelessness makes sense. It doesn't make justice. It doesn't make morality. It doesn't make a humane society. But homelessness is the logical conclusion of not eating the rich. All right. Thanks for that, Delthea. And thanks for this from Colin. The U.S. is giving $55 billion to the entire continent of Africa over a 3-year period, but they give close to $1 trillion to Ukraine in 1 year. Make it make sense. And JB had put in, this world is literally run by supervillains. Thanks for all of those. And we also had Mr. Roger coming in on the Rockfins saying, clear violation. Wait, let me make sure I tag this thing. Don't want to miss a super chat. Roger says, clear violation of the First Amendment. This is public space. He is not supposed to be blocked from going in. Max is supposed to be allowed all the way into those government buildings. I would love for states like West Virginia to be a CBI state. This way we can have an accurate fact of what constituents of U.S. senators want, because we can just point to that and say, well, they must be conservative, but they want left policies. Thanks for that on the Rockfin, Mr. Roger. He's around. And thanks for the super sticker SFT. Let's see. And oh, I think I'd missed this one. Thanks for this super sticker, Richie. Appreciate that. All right. So the call-in's coming up. You can see the link in the chat. And another one jumping in. SFT for T-Red. Thank you. 2 thumbs up and free Assange. Yes, indeed. Thanks for that, Mr. SFT. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing we want to be careful of is just this whole having too much focus on a character like Manchin, because, you know, as we're learning more and more, it's all a game with the rotating villain, and Manchin isn't doing anything that the Democratic Party and especially the owners of the Democratic and Republican parties don't want him to. I mean, he's simply playing his role, and so if you had a Democrat get elected in place of Manchin, it's really not going to make very much difference. I mean, even if you had a super quote-unquote progressive, and I refuse to call any Democrat a progressive anymore, but if you had a super quote-unquote progressive Democrat elected in place of Manchin, I mean, they might slide into the rotating hero role, but then they would slip in another rotating villain, and it's nothing's going to change while we have these two parties in control. And any solutions that we're talking about really have to involve dealing with the money, and have to involve getting bypassing these two parties and getting truly independent candidates in there. And, you know, my thing that people who hear me talk before, see my chats know, you know, I like to talk about demands, the idea of having a specific set of demands and organizing around that. And if you start doing that, if the demands are things that are well beyond what the Democrats and Republicans want to do, like health care for all, as in real health care, single payer, you know, U.S. NHS style, like cutting the defense budgets and ending the wars, period, you know, like real campaign finance reform and things like that. If you have a movement and you can get enough people together as a mass movement organized around these demands, then I think we could really get somewhere. And then when we're talking about these problems, and when we're saying, you know, oh, it's so frustrating, and how can they reelect him, and how does this keep happening, and how do we have this ghoul show in Congress of this wild applause for Zelensky? I mean, we have to do more than just say, oh, this is terrible, this is just, you know, oh, frustrating, right? Okay. But then the left needs to say, and that's why we need to have these step twos. And I'm really trying to challenge people on the left to say, what is that step two? What could we be doing? And I think you need to be focusing on the money, and you need to be having demands. And focusing on the money means, how do you cut those puppet strings between the billionaires and the owner class and the megacorps that own our government and our so-called representatives? And the way you cut those strings is with campaign finance reform, move to amend ballot initiatives for public financing of campaigns. All right. Miss Sabby is back in. We'll slide her over. And we are just about to jump into the call-in. Carry on.
All right, it's about that time. We are going to head over to call in. I definitely want to hear your thoughts. This is episode 65 on call in. If you don't have that app, you can also join call in on your laptop as well. So you can still call in from your computer as well too. But this is episode 65, Chris Hedges interview recap. Let's recap the interview with Chris Hedges. How do you feel about his suggestion for political progress and the future of local actions? Is this the way forward? Is the way forward on the local level? So we can talk about that. We can also talk about other topics I talked about tonight during the show. So I definitely want to hear from you guys. That link is now pinned to the top of the live chat. So that's how you can join. Tomorrow, we are going to do that case study. I told you guys I was going to do a case study about how independent media is suppressed on YouTube. I finally had the time to do the research for it, and I'm going to show you some things that you may not have seen. So we're going to go through that, and I have a couple other news stories as well. But let's head on over to call in, guys. Again, the link is pinned at the top of the chat. I'll see you there. Don't forget to hit the like on your way out if you have not. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's go ahead and do it. All right, guys, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.